I left the New York Times and was recruited to the Day, I immediately went into strategic planning meetings. We had an agency that was sort of guiding that strategic process. And what we came out of that with is that we would redefine the Day, and we would build a business model that put the consumer at the center. And one of those sort of tactical elements was the membership model.
Welcome to the News Nirvana podcast. I'm your host, Nick Parker. The News Nirvana podcast features conversations with media professionals from across the country, highlighting our ever-evolving business models and showcasing the strong and effective journalism produced each and every day. This podcast is made possible to you by the generosity of Town News. Town News delivers solutions, services, and guidance empowering local media organizations to thrive in an ever-changing digital world. Contact Town News today to learn more how they can help you thrive. Connect with them at townnews.com. Daniel Williams, CEO and co-founder of Blue Lena. Welcome to the News Nirvana podcast.
Thank you so much. Very happy to be here.
Well, this is I'm a little bit excited about this episode. It's a little different than what we've done in the first 6 or so episodes as we've launched this podcast. We've talked to a lot of editorial people. We've talked to a few on the business side, but we really haven't talked about audience building, audience retention. And I know that is on all of our minds, all of us that run a news organization of some kind or are in the trenches with it. Building that audience is a different beast than it was 20 years ago. And you run a Blue Lena, a technology company that is focused exactly on that issue that we're all working toward. So really I think I was struck when you and I talked offline a couple days ago by that. You mentioned, it's a different game. We're not chasing subscribers really anymore. We're not chasing mailboxes. Mm-hmm. You could have an audience of 4 at one address instead of just worrying about, are we going to drop a newspaper to that address or are we going to hit that cable box at that household? Yeah. So as you've progressed over this, how do you describe that change in the audience that we're looking for?
Yeah, so the way that I describe it is I think what's happened over the last 10, 15 years is the business model has shifted away from an address-based distribution model where historically we've delivered a printed product to a physical address, a household, a business. There may be multiple occupants who read that product. We knew very little about our audiences. We were primarily concerned with, distributing a printed product to a location. What's changed and what really has accelerated with the advent of smartphones and connected devices is that we've now shifted from an address-based distribution model to a user-based access model for content. And there are so many ways that, those devices that we all have changed our lives in every way, including how we access and consume content. So, I think one of the challenges that we've seen, over that same period of time within the industry is that in shifting from an address-based distribution model to a user-based access model, in many cases, the technology is not built or necessarily equipped to manage that individual consumer relationship. And that's been very problematic for media companies that are trying to go through a transformation of their business model. So what we've done at Blue Lena is develop a company that can help media companies with accelerating that digital transformation by focusing on those individual reader relationships. And the way that we do that is through installing and managing technology on publisher websites that really supports 3 things. One is the conversion of anonymous site visitors to known registered relationships. So that person who you don't know, that unique visitor that's coming into your site and reading content, we're serving uh, ways that that person can establish a relationship. We know who they are. We can manage their profile and preferences and serve relevant content to them. So that's the first part, is the conversion of anonymous site visitors to known. The second part is engaging with those readers to develop a brand relationship. The way that we do that is through certainly serving relevant content on site, but also leveraging digital marketing tools like email, text messaging, social media channel integration, and so forth, to really develop and nurture a relationship with those readers. And then the third part is really the outcome that everything is engineered to achieve, and that is to um, through that process of building relationships and engagement, we want to convert as many of those readers to a paid relationship as possible. Now, not everyone is going to convert to a paid relationship, but if we are effective in the way that we go about, developing those relationships with readers, we think we can, maximize and optimize the rate of conversion, and then lifetime value and retention and all of those things that we're very focused on. So that's basically, Blue Lena and what we do today. And
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
it sounds like, well, actually, before I respond,
Yeah,
I want to take a quick moment here to do the responsible journalistic thing here, and I just want to
sure.
make a mention that Blue Lena, you've just made a partnership with Town
Mhm.
News, who is the sponsor and
Yep.
the magnificent benefactor of my show.
Yep.
So I wanted to get that out there. But I think what you're talking about is really that as an industry, as a news industry, is we're finally catching up with what every other business has had to do, which is make their brand about the people. Like, we
Right.
actually have to know who those people are, what they're seeking, and how to form a relationship. And I think for a long time we didn't have to do that because we were just structured on delivering to an address so that
Yeah.
we could tell our advertisers we're
Right.
going to x thousand addresses, right? I mean, it's really, this is all about people.
Yep. Yeah, it's been a real problem, for we were sort of victims of our own success, in that we were able to rely and depend on consistent circulation volume growth, for many years. And our business model was primarily driven by advertising, which was based on, the number of eyeballs, the number of people who that you were able to allow an advertiser to reach. And so we were just the business, didn't really take into consideration reader interest and reader needs, or at least, we weren't focused enough on that. And now it's a much more competitive situation. The attention age, as some people call it. There are a lot of different ways that people can access and consume content, and we're finding that we're having to to work hard to develop and maintain those reader relationships as things
Yeah,
continue.
I think a lot of, for especially, and I'm going to stay on the newspaper side because that's where most of my
Yeah.
experience is. But I think for a lot of us, really beyond a few focus groups, when we would redesign a print product,
Mhm.
right? We didn't really look past the details of who the people were
Right. Right.
that we were doing it, and now we're using it to shape
Yeah.
how we deliver, what we deliver, in which format it's delivered. Um, so what do you? I guess what kind of things are you trying to collect when you're working to establish who these people are, who the audience is? What are you trying to collect so that that relationship can then be built? And I think we'll go to that next. But
Yeah.
but what are you trying to collect? How do you actually do that?
Yeah. So, going back to the what I was describing earlier, the sort of legacy business model was a physical address. So I live at 306 Ambermore Place in Cary, North Carolina. So in the business system at a newspaper, I was an address, right? And then there would be a name associated to that, transactions and so forth. What has changed is we now look at email as sort of the definition of a customer relationship. So, you know, I have multiple emails, but my email is a unique identifier that, is basically specific to me as an individual. And then my wife has a different email address, and my children have different email addresses, and so forth. So we have shifted away from using address as the unique identifier to now using email as the unique identifier. So the technology that we use, like IQ Audience Plus for publishers, it starts with establishing a relationship with a reader through a registration process, whether that's them inputting an email or using a single sign-on method. They can sign up or log in using their Facebook profile, Twitter profile, and so forth. But it's all tied to an email address rather than a physical address.
Do we have a preference if they're using how they're signing on, if they're using like an established social media, Facebook, Twitter login versus punching in a an email address? Does that kind of connection change the data that we're collecting or how well we can know them?
I think it will become more important over time, especially, as third-party cookies are going away, and um, you know, you want to have a direct relationship with the reader. And I feel like it's very important that publishers own that relationship with the reader, including all of the associated metadata involved with a reader relationship in the way that they interact with the brand. Facebook and Google, and Twitter and LinkedIn, they've made it such that there are the elements of data that they will share with you that they will pass over, but they're also preserving and maintaining you know some elements that are very important and actionable, and we feel like that should be owned and maintained by the publisher. I think that'll become more important over time. Right now, from just our research, across 120 newsrooms that we work with today, um, we see about 35% of people will use email. They'll create a profile using their email address and literally inputting an email address. The other 65% are choosing to use the single sign-on method because it's basically one click and you're
Right.
registered, which is a very convenient thing. But again, you're basically ceding some of the control over to those third party applications like Facebook, Google, LinkedIn, Twitter, etc.
Are there other things that we are, I guess, that we're looking at that we're collecting? I guess I'm kind of
Yeah,
wanted to dig
yeah,
in a little bit about
right.
what we're trying to find out about the audience.
Great. Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question because the three things that we sort of do at Blue Lena, that second part about engagement to develop a reader relationship. When we work with publishers, part of our services involves building a lifecycle marketing curriculum. And so when a reader registers, we don't look at that as the end of the process. We actually look at that as the beginning of the process. So it's a milestone. So an anonymous visitor has now registered, created a relationship. But that's the beginning. So we then enter them into an onboarding series that welcomes them to the brand, sends the thank you for registering and all of that. Here are the newsletters. Trying to sort of nurture and develop that relationship. But as part of that curriculum, we also deploy audience surveys. And so what those audience surveys allow us to do is to actually capture first party responses from individual readers about the things that they find most valuable, the content that they like to read, what they want to see more of. We ask things like net promoter score to get a gauge of their, really for benchmarking to understand like, how strong the brand is in the market across their readership. We also ask if they're not a subscriber or member, how likely they are to support that publisher by joining as a subscriber or member. And the benefit of those surveys is, not only are you aggregating a lot of valuable information that can help shape product strategy and whatnot, but it actually becomes actionable information. So if Joe Smith, as part of that onboarding series, receives a survey, fills it out, and expresses intent to become a subscriber and he's not already, then we can actually key off of that information to send a customized, marketing communication. So he might have indicated that he's interested in high school sports. We can say, hey, here are examples of the type of high school sports coverage that you'll get from fill in the blank. So that's part of what we do, and it's again in the sort of spirit of an ongoing nurturing and development and optimization and enrichment of the data that starts with a reader volunteering to register and share some information about themselves, but then over time they're providing more information based on a trusted relationship that they've now established with the publisher.
So that, I guess, how is that process working? Are we having good luck with people continuing to engage with those? I mean, there's a lot of automated responses
Yeah.
in the way these things work,
Yeah.
and us olds, right? I mean, we always wonder how is that response working? Do people stay engaged? How do we how do we keep them engaged?
Yeah, so a typical onboarding series would be over 90 days for any given publisher. So we would, the first 90 days of that reader's relationship to the brand is mapped out, and we'll send anywhere from 15 to 20 discrete emails that are sequentially spaced out, every 7, 10 days or what have you. Um, and so what we see is that, and this is really, I think, evidence that it's working, and we'll monitor all of this as well, but we see the open rates and the click-through rates sustained over that time. So if a publisher is getting 30% open rate on the first email, we're seeing similar open rate 90 days later as a reader cycles through that introduction and orientation phase.
What's the next step? So we've spent 90 days bringing them into the fold.
Yep.
What are we doing with these systems to keep them there? I know a lot of that is on the product, the actual product that's being
Yep.
delivered, but your engagement through your systems and things doesn't end after the 90 days.
Right. So, and there are actually there are different sort of permutations and pathways that readers can take through that 90 days. So if on day 27 they've converted from a registered user to a paid, then we actually exit them from the you know registered user onboarding series and put them into a different onboarding series for new members. So those are sort of different. It's a think of like a decision tree as a reader moves along that path. Once they get to the end of that, first 90 days, then they go into a little more individualized, tailored communication scheme based upon their content preferences, their frequency of visit, things that we can sort of key off of based upon their level of engagement. So if people are less engaged with content, then we'll detect that and try to bring them back in. Um, so there are any number of ways that we engage with those folks. It doesn't end at the end. It doesn't complete at the end of 90 days. It just sort of transitions into a less sort of methodical introduction
Mm,
and more nuanced based on the individual user.
right. Well, you just mentioned, and you've actually mentioned it twice now about that conversion to the paid
Yep.
customer, where it's a paid relationship. Are we? This may not be fair to ask you, but I'm gonna do it anyway. Are we to a point now where really is the debate finally over of whether we're going to need to have people pay for content? Are we finally at that point where yes they will and yes we can?
I think so. I mean, well, I think it depends a lot on the publication and their business model. I mean, at Blue Lena, we support publishers that have open access models where philosophically, they're just either opposed to having any kind of access controls on their site, or maybe they are, a nonprofit newsroom and they're getting, funding through philanthropy or what have you, and so, you know, providing restrictions on access to content is in opposition to their mission. So we do have publishers that have open access models, in which case it's more of a donation, ask. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have publishers who have hard paywalls, as well as metered access or freemium content where readers are allowed to sample a certain amount of content before they're required to pay. I have a bias toward that. I mean, that's a model that we introduced to the industry when I was at the Day Publishing Company about 10 years ago. We were the first company to do so at that time there were two other media companies in the US that had any kind of access control. You had a hard paywall at the Democrat Gazette in Little Rock, and then you had the New York Times with its Times Select program, which has since been recast as what we know today. But at the Day, we introduced a membership model that was required a reader to register, not pay, but register after a certain number of articles. And the purpose of that was we really wanted to build that audience database and intelligence. Same thing that I've been describing here, so that we could nurture relationship. And then we had a meter after I think it was 10 articles, where at that point readers were required to pay to continue reading access, and we made that available to anybody who was in a paid relationship. So by definition, a print subscriber was entitled to digital access. They needed only to create a user profile and activate it. And that has become a model that I think for the most part, that's what has emerged as the most common is a
Yeah, we've seen that a lot
yeah.
in a lot of places.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued by the idea I mean, even just the language change of not a subscriber but a member, where you're a member of this
Yeah.
publications community, right? How did you sell that? How did you pitch that and approach your prospective audiences?
Yeah.
Because I think it is a change. It's a very intentional change from the publisher's side, but you're asking. I think you're making a different ask of your reader as well.
Yeah. No, I love to tell this story because, it was, looking back, and it seems like an eternity, but in other ways it seems like, um, when I went to the Day, there was a publisher, Gary Ferrugia, who really had a vision for, and you know, sort of a commitment to building a new business model for media. And that business model was based on putting the consumer at the center. Again, up to that point, we had been primarily advertising driven business. And we were at that point probably 6, 7 years into a continuous steady decline of advertising revenue. And we were just beginning to debate whether it was sustainable to continue providing content digitally and make it freely available that we were charging for on a printed medium, right? So,
Right.
so Gary and the management team there, when I left the New York Times and was recruited to the Day, I immediately went into strategic planning meetings. We had an agency that was sort of guiding that strategic process. And what we came out of that with is that we would redefine the Day, and we would build a business model that put the consumer at the center. And one of those sort of tactical elements was the membership model, which meant that we would, going forward, so we agreed as a management team that there was a value in what we produced, and we felt that it was appropriate to ask and seek a fair and reasonable contribution from readers in order to allow us to continue to produce the things that they found value in.
The News Nirvana podcast is brought to you by Town News, the creators of IQ Audience Plus. IQ Audience Plus replaces your old school, one-size-fits-all paywall with a smarter metering solution that targets visitors with custom offers, converting drive-bys into paying subscribers. Learn more at townnews.com/audience.
So that became the membership model. We didn't look at, the registration or meter as the strategy. We looked at that as a tactic. The strategy was building the audience database, and then uncovering all the different ways that we can monetize our audience, certainly through subscriptions or memberships, as we called it, but also through connecting advertisers with the premium audience. And so at the day, we defined members as anyone who was supporting the day financially. So by definition, readers and advertisers were considered to be members.
You put them in the same silo.
Well, there was an advertiser relationship and there was a reader relationship, but they were all considered members because they were supporting us financially. We saw our role at the day as an infomediary that connects buyers and sellers in the local market. And the way that you do that is through providing content and services that people find value in, whether it's a reader or an advertiser. And I think that's a kind of it's maybe a different way of describing it, but that to me has been the business model since the penny press, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we've
Yeah.
always existed as long as there's an audience, as long as we're producing something of value and there's an audience that finds value in that, there will be an advertiser market that wants to reach that audience. And that was our role. Our role was to bring together readers and advertisers. And so the membership model was the way that we did that.
How is it? I guess tell me what you see though as that's the next evolution, because I think you're right that's how the all the way back to the beginning of the newspapers,
Yeah.
that was the thing. But how is it different now, the way you're treating them as members?
Well, it's different now because that was a very unique model, and I think the industry has sort of coalesced around the idea that that what we do, there's a value, and we can ask readers, and we'll get a significant number of readers who will support that, whether whatever the motivation is. They want to support local media. They enjoy the convenience of access and all of that. We uh, introduced the concept, and now I think the industry has sort of embraced that, and you see that, and
Was your change, and I know this is getting a little bit away from the technology side of things, but was your relationship, the way you approached and worked with the advertisers, a little different?
yeah, 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 it was. I mean, we would. So the way that the was sort of organized is advertising was still tasked with developing relationships with advertisers and selling advertiser packages and so forth. But if you were an advertiser, if you were an advertiser on contract, or you were an advertiser that wasn't on contract but was spending a certain amount of money every year, then that entitled you to use a rewards platform that we developed, that um, you could put things of value into that rewards platform, and we would leverage the marketing capabilities of the day and the audience database that we were building to promote those advertiser services to our premium members, right? So that was another element to it, and so we had sponsorship packages. We did a lot of contesting. I don't know the financial figures today, but at that point, we were generating probably $250,000 a year, just in sponsorship packages around contesting. And the nice thing about that is, contesting is certainly a great way to promote the brand, both for the day and for its advertisers. But it was also a data generator. So
Right.
person that enters a contest now becomes a qualified reader that we can bring into the database and market. If they're not a member, we can promote membership and so forth. So yeah, there were a lot of different aspects to that strategy that we developed there. We could spend hours talking about it, but I think what made it unique and successful even today is going back to putting the consumer at the center of the business model and really building the whole business enterprise around that concept.
Well, and I like the way you're talking about it, and even though I went a little bit from your technology with that last question, that I think it helps bring everything
Yeah.
kind of full circle, in that what for those that aren't data nerds, right? It can be intimidating, and often I think to a lot of people it seems impersonal. But really, what you're talking about is using the collection of this data
Yeah.
to make everything we do about the people, which is something I think we talk a lot about on an editorial side of things, but not always talking about it on the business side or the advertising side. But that's really what we're doing is we're using all of this data to find out who the people are that's our audience, who the people are that are our business, and then making those connections.
Well, we're nowhere. We're not even in the same, stratosphere as Amazon and companies like that.
They've
But
got a little head start on us.
well, yeah, but if you think about in your own life, you go to Amazon and you're purchasing things, and they're using that information to better understand your preferences and serve you things that at least their algorithms suggest would be relevant and might result in purchase activity. Um, you know, we're trying to do the same sort of thing, I think, in media, in that it starts with establishing a relationship in a very trusting or trustful, respectful way. Um, be good stewards of that reader relationship and first party data, but the purpose is to create a better experience for the reader and a better experience, and also a more relevant content experience when they come into site, and potentially even go off network. So yeah.
What do you see? I guess going forward, how does this change and evolve?
um, Again, I think to the extent that publishers, and we're seeing a lot of progress today. It took a while to get to this point, but I think you know just about every publisher out there today that has an owned and operated website has some sort of registration process. And so why are you doing that? You're doing that because you want to build a database. You want to be able to engage with those readers. Certainly move them along a path to conversion if that's part of your revenue model. But I think in this age of um, competing for people's attention. Um, the companies that are going to be successful are the ones that can provide an optimal user experience, can provide relevant content, not be creepy about it, but it's basically like a permission-based relationship. And I think that where publishing companies are at an advantage is because most of these companies are established brands that have trust in their communities. We are well positioned to sort of be that resource that people look to when they want to know about what's going on in their community. They're comfortable with um, sharing certain information about themselves that allows that publisher to provide a relevant experience and so forth. But I don't know. That's a little esoteric. But,
Well, I think I like what you said though about how it might be a little easier for the publishers because they are usually
mhm.
established brands. But
Yeah,
I think also we're finding in today's world that we're having to do a lot more work to stay that established and
yeah,
trusted brand. So this is the kind of thing, if we do it right, if we nurture it correctly, we can reestablish ourselves or
yeah.
keep that trusted relationship going. When you look at audience building and that building that relationship, what are really the big keys? What do you really see as it's important that we do it? Maybe not this way, but we establish these things so that we can have that relationship.
Well, I'll start at the macro level. I would really like to see more collaboration and coordination across the industry to develop some sort of um, single sign-on. And I know there have been attempts. There are a couple of projects that have convened over the past few years to
We
try.
don't always share well together
Yeah,
as an
well,
industry.
yeah. I mean, part of that is because I think there's a view among a lot of the publishing groups that we're finding success with monetizing readers why would we want to dilute or give up some of that revenue share for the greater good of, community journalism?
Right.
I think that's short-sighted. I think you have to think. I mean, I know this is the case in my life. Like my wife and I talk about, you know, and we were kind of late to do this, but the whole cord cutting trend, like, uh,
Right.
we finally cut the cord, and now it's like I'm sitting back. I'm like, wait a second. Like we subscribe to YouTube, we subscribe to Amazon, we subscribe to Netflix, we subscribe to Hulu, we subscribe to, you know,
Right.
and now like there's this unbundling that's happening even within those platforms. So I think you're going to see well, to kind of bring this back to media, there's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of energy around, and there's a lot of attention and focus and resource and so forth being put into developing uh, reader revenue models. But I think at some point soon, you're going to see the pendulum swing back in the direction of aggregation, because there will be some, point where, readers will say, okay, I've got, 12 different subscriptions, and collectively I'm paying, $300 a month. And I really would like to have um, one subscription that allows me to access, the sites that I frequent most, and here's what I'm willing to pay. There isn't any solution out there that I'm aware of that enables that. But I think that's, and I'm saying, 3-4 years down the road, I can see something like that coming in and disrupting the subscription market.
Yeah, I don't think it's been figured out yet as far as how to put it all together. But I think even
I don't think it's a technology. I don't think it's a technology
no,
issue.
I
Getting
think it's the relationships
right.
between the business and the reader. But I think even we have that discussion at a much smaller scale with ourselves, right? Because we've created 7 different newsletters for one publication. So here's your newsletter that gets you just access to high school sports. Here's one that's just access to what's happening at City Hall, what's going on in the local
Yeah.
schools, right? And at some point though, we want you to come to the entire package.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the relationship we want. And I think sometimes we go a little too far with that separation, I guess, just to give people the one thing they want.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed.
Is that the kind of thing though that is that where maybe we're relying too much on all that stuff that we're gathering, and so we try to just focus on, hey, I said my interest was in this in the survey, and we're not sending them the rest of it. How do we do that? How do we get them to look at the rest of the product that we offer?
Well,
Did I say that clearly?
I think I understand. I mean, that's part of, the nurturing of a relationship. Like we don't want to beat people over the head and try to compel them to sign up and, for newsletters that they're not interested in. But periodically, we want to expose them to things. I mean, that to me is, one of the best uh, parts of, the newspaper traditional newspaper experience was the serendipitous discovery of content that you weren't necessarily seeking out, but was in front of you on a page, and you were exposed to things that way. And I think the danger of like personalization going too far in one direction, and Lord knows we see that enough in like our social and political discourse today.
Right.
People seek out information that affirms their beliefs, or people are only being exposed to the things that they're interested in, then it isn't broadening their worldview or exposing them to things um, that they probably would benefit from being exposed to, even if it challenges their beliefs or interests. Not to get political, but I see that as a real unintended consequence of this move to personalization and tribalism.
No, and I agree, but I will even maybe take it a little step further. I think also just looking at how we monetize the products, right? I can create more connections and relationships between an advertising member and a reader member if they're looking at more products, if they're
Yeah.
seeing more things
Yeah.
happening in the community through the publication that I produce, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I can serve them both better if they're seeing more.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, so if let's kind of wrap things a little bit this way for those that haven't started to really dig into audience data to this to get the nerdy stuff going. You know, what is I guess what do you suggest? How should people approach this and start working this kind of programming into their publications?
Wow. Well, I think it's if you're not committed to this as an organization today, whether you're doing these things or not, I think it starts with a commitment from the top of the organization. That, and again, going back to my experience at the day, things started to change, things started to move. We were able to accelerate transformation once we coalesced around this idea of putting the consumer at the center of the business model. So everyone from the executive editor to the ad director to the director of audience to the director of production and operations was aligned with that strategic direction. So that's the starting point. I think you always, you have to begin there. Otherwise, there's going to be a lot of inertia in the organization to do the sort of things that you need to do to change. Um, so once you have that, then I would one of the if there's a lesson that I can impart or learning that I can any wisdom, if you will, it's that the mistake that I see a lot is where companies, maybe they have organized around this idea. But the mistake is when you go out and you make technology decisions and then try to fit a strategy around it based upon the limitations of technology. We see that happen a lot. You have to begin with the strategy and determine what it is that you're trying to accomplish as a business, and then use those things as the criteria upon which you make technology decisions. And if you don't, if you don't do that, then you're going to get stuck. You're going to, deliver a suboptimal experience to your readers, whether it's a content management system, whether it's a registration and access control, whether it's, a newsletter management, program, or any of those things. You need to begin with the strategy and then make technology decisions. Um, so, I think that's some advice that I would offer. Once you have sort of the elements and the team and the leadership and the strategy in place, I always think it's important that you um, really reposition the company to be focused on um, the customer, their interests, their wants, and use that information to shape product strategy, revenue strategy, um, market development strategy. All of those things should be informed by the data and the insights that you're able to unlock um, once you have the right technology and the right processes and so forth in place. So does that answer the question?
I think so, and I really like the conversation that we've had, and mainly because it really does take. This is the kind of thing that's going to make a product better from
Mhm.
all sides. If we know the people, our stories, our content is better because we're talking about the people in the community.
Yep.
If we know who they are and what they want, it helps us craft
Yep.
the content. But it's also on the other side of things, it makes us better serve those advertisers and those business partners that we cultivate, right? So we're getting
Yeah.
them to the right audience. We're making those connections, and I
This is
really
yeah.
early on I liked what you said though about members.
Yeah.
You put them in the same. You give that member title to both your reader and your business partners.
This isn't new. This whole concept of using consumer research, putting the consumer in the middle of the business model. It may be new to media, but it's not new. Like consumer
We're a
pack.
little slow.
Well, I think it's because we're rooted in this manufacturing tradition where we do the
Yes.
same thing every day, and it's very repetitive, and it's hard to break that cycle. I mean, that goes back, again, 100 years.
Well, and you said it earlier, right? We were a victim of our own success. I mean, if for
Right,
so long we were doing so well, why
right.
change?
Right. And so I think if there were another industry outside of publishing that I would look to, it would be consumer packaged goods, because you want to talk about an uber competitive space.
Yes.
Like if you're looking at laundry detergent or cereal or soap, shaving cream, all of those things, it is um, all driven by consumer research, um, and then the brands are built to really aimed at specific um, market, like verticals within a vertical. So and I think that publishing actually could learn a lot by studying that model, and how they're very relentlessly focused on research and consumer data to drive product strategy and marketing strategy.
Agreed. Well, Daniel, I appreciate you coming on, giving us a little bit of time today. If people want to know more about you and Blue Lena, how can they follow you? How can they see more?
Well, you can go to bluelena.io, which is our website. You can find me on LinkedIn. Name's pretty common, but Daniel Williams, Blue Lena. And on Twitter, we've got our Blue Lena Twitter handle. And so, and you can sign up for our newsletters as well. I know there are a lot of folks on this listening to this podcast. I suspect everyone listening to the podcast is in some way related to or working within the publishing industry. So, yeah, you can sign up and hopefully find some relevant content that we send out. And yeah.
Well, again, I appreciate you giving us some time, and really, this is the first time we've been able to really kind of dig in about learning on our audiences and how to build those. And I think that's, like I said there at the front of this, is that's something
Yeah.
we're all really focused on and really trying to figure out how best to
Yeah.
build and keep relationships with our readers.
Well, the last thing that I'll say, and this probably belongs at the front of the podcast, but we are really excited about this relationship with Town News. I've known Brad and Rick and James and all the folks at Town News for a long, long time. My previous company, which many of your listeners will know, Leap Media Solutions, we worked very closely with Town News. They were a partner of ours. We had a lot of common clients. It's a company with very high integrity, outstanding technology. Blue Lena's business model, we are not a technology company by definition. We don't develop technology. What we do is we identify and partner with what we believe to be world-class technology that we then deploy, integrate, and resource on behalf of publishers. And we wanted to do this partnership with Town News because we believe that both Block CMS as well as IQ Audience Plus are world-class technologies that will allow publishers to be successful and transform their businesses. And so we're really excited about the opportunity to work with them and support their publishers and doing all of that. So.
Well said, and I'm going to agree because they allow me to get on a microphone and just talk to people as often as I want.
Yeah. Well, I've really enjoyed it, so hope to be
Well,
back soon down the road. Yeah.
well, thanks again. I appreciate the time. That's going to wrap up this episode of the News Nirvana podcast. We'll talk to everybody next
Okay,
time.
thanks. All right.
The News Nirvana podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or most any of your favorite podcast apps. The News Nirvana podcast is made possible by the generosity of Town News. Connect with Town News at townnews.com. The News Nirvana podcast is produced by Fredcasts. Think, speak, act,